Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Lililth Rüschenpöhler and I'm a researcher in chemistry education at Ludwigsburg University of Education in Germany. And in the following 20 minutes roundabout, I would like to introduce you to the concept of chemistry capital based on a study that I conducted. And I conducted this study together with my colleague Sylvia Markic, with who I'm still working at Ludwigsburg University of Education. So, chemistry capital. I would like to start with a brief overview of the origins of chemistry capital theory. So, the concept is rooted in Pierre Bourdieu's capital theory. Pierre Bourdieu was a French sociologist, and he developed a very nuanced notion of capital which can be transmitted from generation to generation. So his argument is that we do not only inherit economic capital from our parents and families, such as money or property, but besides that we also inherit cultural capital, such as attitudes, values, knowledge, things like these. This is cultural capital, and also social capital, such as the social network that we grow up in. And these three forms of capital are passed on from families to their children, from parents to their children, and so on. And this is how social distinctions are made in our society and how they are also maintained over generations. This is an important point. And Archer and colleagues adapted Bourdieu's framework to science and developed the notion of science capital, because they argue that today, about 50 years after Pierre Bourdieu, the social distinctions are now mainly made in the field of science. So science is an important place where social distinctions are made today, because science has grown in importance. And I am a researcher in chemistry education, and I'm also teaching chemistry in school. And so I was interested in how this works in chemistry education and in the field of chemistry. So I'm interested in how social inequalities are produced in this specific field. And for this, I developed the notion of chemistry capital based on the study that I will present today to you. My theory is that people do have economic chemistry capital. They have also cultural chemistry capital, and they can have social chemistry capital. So the three forms that Bourdieu defined. And in the study that I presented today, we analyzed the flows of chemistry capital in a sample of secondary school students in Germany. So how is chemistry capital transmitted from the home environment, from school to the student, and so on. So in this study, we started with three basic research questions for understanding chemistry capital. The first research question was to understand the role of the school. So how does school contribute to students' acquisition of chemistry capital? And then we wanted to understand also the role of the home environment. So how does home environment contribute to students' individual chemistry capital? And the last question concerned the individual strategies that students employ for acquiring chemistry capital. And for answering these three questions, we designed an interview study with a sample of 48 secondary school students. We conducted this research in Germany, in German schools, in secondary schools. And since we wanted a diverse sample, we conducted the study with students from the three main school types which are present in Germany. And the German school system is highly differentiated, I would say, and it is very selective. So in most regions in Germany, we have a system of ability grouping. High-achieving students are put into Gymnasium, and students of the middle ability group go to Realschule, and Hauptschule is the school with the lowest entry requirements. So in our sample, we wanted to represent this. We had 15 students from Gymnasium, 21 students from Realschule, and 12 students from Hauptschule. So this was our sample, and we obtained the data through semi-structured interviews. And these interviews were quite open. We had main questions and follow-up questions, and it was structured mainly by the three main questions which I asked in each interview. And the follow-up questions were used more freely. according to the context. So in all interviews, I really try to follow the thoughts of the students and to understand their personal connection with chemistry. So I used the follow-up questions just to get a bit deeper. And I started all interviews with the very open questions. What comes to your mind when you think about chemistry? So here I wanted to learn about the students' first associations with chemistry. And then in the second part, I wanted to know what role chemistry plays in their home environment. So on an afternoon at home, what role does chemistry play? And the last question was about the role chemistry could play in their lives after they finish school. This was the interview guide. And for analyzing this data I obtained in the interviews, I used a qualitative approach. I used thematic analysis and I proceeded in 3 steps. So in the first phase, in the first step, I used structural and process coding. I was working alone at first. I was coding the data, but there were several instances where we worked together in a team to look at the material from different perspectives, to share our ideas, and to discuss our interpretative lenses. And this group was composed of 3 science education researchers, and me included, and a secondary school teacher. And at this time I wasn't yet teaching in school, so I'm the researcher, 2 other researchers, and 1 chemistry teacher. Okay, after this first phase of coding, the goal in the second phase was to analyze the individual causal relations for each individual case. So I really wanted to understand how are things connected. We used the technique of building causal networks, and I wrote case reports for each case. So this was important because I wanted to understand the flows of chemistry capital for each individual student. I looked at each individual interview and drew a network like this, chemistry capital at home, school factors, emotional attachment, etc. And I tried to understand how are they linked? What are the relations between these entities? So I drew a map for every student. And in the last phase, I took all these maps, all these graphs that I had drawn, and I tried to find the analytical story. And for this, I used the technique of pattern coding. And this photo on the slide shows one of the steps I made, one of the techniques I used in this phase. There were several other techniques, but I really tried to organize the individual cases, causal networks, and to find groups of cases which are similar. So I've tried to find similarities between the students to really understand the big picture. And this was the final analytical step in this analysis. Okay, so through this analysis, we found 4 different patterns of the flows of chemistry capital. And in the following, I would like to present all of these 4 groups successively, and I will start with group number 1. First, I will give you, just to give you an impression, I will give you a citation from one of the students. It was from an interview from group 1. Just for you to get a feeling what these students are like, the student said, for example, we have a property in Heimsheim, that's a village close to Stuttgart, and there his grandfather, has some chemical substances, those that you can experiment with. Then, for example, we made what is it called, a foam volcano or something, where all the foam sprayed out. So on the right, on the slide, you see such a foam volcano. I think that might have been the thing he was talking about, the experiment. And this is just, the student has a grandfather who adores chemistry and who does chemistry experiments with his grandchild in their free time. They share this time together, and it is very clear, I think, in this citation that this student has chemistry-related resources at home. His grandfather is a great resource for chemistry capital to him. So in this group, we had 6 students. From all the interviews, 6 students had chemistry capital at home, and some of them, like the student that I mentioned just here, they did experiments at home together with relatives, and these chemistry-related activities helped the students anchoring their knowledge. So they really had an anchor for understanding the relevance of chemistry knowledge to their lives. And some students had a family member who could explain chemistry content to them, which is of course of great help when you go to school and already have somebody as a backup at home who can explain chemistry. And also some students reported that family members were role models to them who support their development of an emotional attachment to chemistry. And this of course supports their learning in chemistry. And this pattern is, like as you can see here in the graph, is typical for students with chemistry capital at home. Okay, let's get to group number 2. Group 2 is composed of students who do dispose of general educational capital at home, but this capital is chemistry unspecific, so it is not chemistry capital but general educational capital. And in this group we had 4 students. These students can share with their families general learning experiences, so the families are interested in learning and in knowledge in general, but this desire is really general and not chemistry specific as it was in group 1. So the activities at home are not chemistry specific, but they are general learning activities. Also, some families use their economic capital. For example, they pay for private tutoring so that the student can acquire chemistry knowledge through this help. And also the family's openness towards education can help developing a general learner identity and an emotional attachment to chemistry, which can help the students to engage in learning chemistry. Okay, so here you have a rather general learning support for the students, and it is not chemistry specific. And this is typical for the group 2 in our sample. So group number 3 was slightly different. It was composed of 9 students in our sample, and in these students' home environments, any type of educational capital was scarcely present. So there was very little educational capital, be it chemistry capital or general educational capital. So family members of these students tended to have a very loose relationship to chemistry, and this contributed only little to the students' emotional attachment to chemistry. Further, some students reported chemistry-related activities and support, but these were not as effective as in the first 2 groups. For example, one student reported that he had a cousin who was studying chemistry, so apparently he had chemistry capital, and talking to this cousin excited this student also about chemistry, so he was really interested in it, but the cousin lived in a town about 2 hours from her place, so they didn't really have regular contact. So effectively, the cousin's influence on the students was relatively small. So this chemistry capital was present, but it was really distant, and it had only minor influence on this student. And regarding chemistry knowledge, there were phenomena that we hadn't observed in the other groups. As you can see in the red arrow here in the center, the students were chemistry experts in their families, and there was no person at home who could correct the students when they said something wrong. Further, some students reported they had experienced conflicting worldviews. And the following citation that I will just read to you from one interview can illustrate this. Let us look into the citation. I asked the student, "Have you ever talked about your chemistry class at home?" And the student said, "Yes, for example, about the atom model. I talked about that at home. But apart from that, I don't do that very often." How did they react at home? "Well, sometimes when my parents don't understand it, they want to explain you that it's wrong." So, as you can see in this citation, the family of the student had a very different view of the composition of the physical world. They want to tell him that the atom model is wrong, and they did not share the atom model. And students who make this type of experience at home are very likely to have difficulties learning chemistry, because learning chemistry can mean that they have conflicts at home, that they have social tensions at home, only because they bring their chemistry knowledge at home. Okay, so this is really a different picture from the first two groups. Group number 3. We will now look at group number 4. This last group was by far the largest. There were 29 students who fell into this group, and these students do not have educational capital with exchange value in their home environment. And this leads to many different phenomena that we did not observe in the other groups. So there were things that appeared here for the first time. For example, some students reported that they experienced chemistry as if it was a foreign language. When they go home, they have to explain chemistry, but not only explain the concepts, but also translate chemistry to a different language. And this is really different for students who just learned the concepts in German, and they cannot translate it to a different language because they didn't know the concept in a different language. So this is really a difficulty for them. And it also points towards an emotional detachment. And it's just the case because parents sometimes don't speak German sufficiently. And one student said that he had stopped talking about chemistry altogether at home because it was too difficult to explain the words to his parents. So there's really a barrier between the home environment and the school chemistry based on words, concepts, language. And also severe conflicts in the families can occur when talking about chemistry, as the following citation shows. So the student said, my parents and my siblings, they know that God created them. I am on that side too, because I'm Christian and Orthodox, and it is also important. Regarding the Big Bang, I'm not so sure. There are facts, and that's why I'm sometimes undecided. So I think you can see here that there is really a conflict between religious beliefs and the scientific worldview for this student. He's really in a tension. Later in the interview, the student reported also on an argument that he had had with his family where they had been shouting at home, and really a severe conflict just because of this dissonance between the worldviews. And this shows the difficult conditions of these students for learning chemistry, because it leads to severe conflicts at home. Furthermore, many students in this group were taught by chemistry by a teacher who did not hold a university degree in chemistry. So they had unqualified teachers. This was the case for all students attending Hauptschule, so the school type with the lowest entry requirements in Germany. And this lack of qualified teachers aggravates the students' situation, so they don't really have the chance to acquire chemistry capital. Some reported that they could not apply for the apprenticeship they wanted because they needed chemistry knowledge as a requirement for this apprenticeship. And I also interviewed some of the teachers of the students, and some of these teachers showed severe misconceptions about chemistry just because they were not trained to be chemistry teachers. Okay, so this situation is really difficult, but there were exceptions. There were some students who acquired chemistry capital using individual strategies. These are depicted here in the graph with green arrows. And there were some boys, 2 boys, who followed a chemistry YouTuber and developed a chemistry identity in this way. For the students, the YouTuber served as a role model. He was like a nerdy, smart scientist, and these 2 boys identified with this YouTuber. And this strategy was used only by male students in this sample, and one girl in this group developed chemistry capital individual in a different way. She just loved learning and was really, she had a very strong learner identity with which she identified. So I have a citation from her. She said, "I brood over things until I understand them, especially in chemistry, because then I get this inner positive feedback when I have done a difficult task." Then later I asked, have you shown that to your family, or not really? They aren't really interested in that. That's why I have done it for myself, because I thought it was really cool. Have you told somebody about it? No, nobody actually. So I think this is really impressive. This student has such a focus on learning that she can motivate herself just in her inner strength. So her attitude helped the students to develop chemistry capital despite the lack of feedback from her family. Okay, so let me now come to some concluding remarks. And yeah, for me personally, as you might have seen, getting to know these students and talking to them impressed me really a lot, especially when learning how they deal with their inner struggles and how they find their individual ways to develop chemistry capital. So that really touched me personally. And the study showed me three things. So first, the chemistry capital available in the family plays a major role in the development of young people's connections with chemistry. This creates inequalities between the students. And second, our school system in Germany seems to fail compensating for these inequalities. Institutions could compensate for the inequalities, but in this study, the students with chemistry capital at home had qualified teachers, while those students who did not have chemistry capital at home tended to be taught by unqualified teachers. And this aggravates existing inequalities. However, there were some very resilient students, as we saw in the last group. They acquire chemistry capital individually through social media or based on their inner strength. Yeah, and with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to see you in the discussion.